So Justin, what is this 619 Spirits? I've been there myself. It's in North Park. Big, lots of open seating right now for the time we're in. Also, a great place to watch football or any kind of sports because they do have a lot of screens around, but they have good food as well. So, what do you guys do there, and how have you been doing during this challenging time?
Yeah, absolutely. So here at 619, we focus on making our own vodka. So we are a vodka distillery. We make all of our vodka from sugarcane. So we kind of go back to the natural source, if you will. So there's not a whole lot of like the extracting like you usually would have to through wheat and such whenever you're usually making alcohol. We just kind of went straight for the source. So from there, we do some natural infusions. We do cucumber. We have like a rose petal one. We get all of those from our local farms around San Diego. So we try to keep it as local as possible. We have about 6 different varieties. We have our original, the cucumber, the rose petal. We have a pickle vodka that's a lot of fun. We've got a scorpion vodka that's super spicy. We've got a coffee vodka. So we just trying to focus on like the infusions and then keeping it all local. So we're called 619 Spirits just because we actually carry only San Diego alcohol. So even if it's not ours, you're still drinking locally. You've got your 117 West Coast whiskey. It's up in Vista. We've got Henneberry that's down here in San Diego. So we just strictly only stick to that. So we don't have anything like Jameson or anything like that. We just stick to the local San Diego stuff.
Wow, that sounds great. I didn't realize all that. Your face is cut off a little bit. Your camera's catching. There you go. Now we can see your eye. But that's great. I didn't realize all of the natural elements to that. So what do we have today? What are we doing today?
So today we're going to be doing a cocktail called the Tangerine Dream. We use fresh pressed juices. We actually fresh press all of our juices here between limes, lemon, tangerine, so on and so forth. So we kind of take a fun spin in like a fall type style winter. We're doing the Tangerine with the Reposado tequila from Califino, another great place up in Oceanside that does a phenomenal tequila I really, really like a lot. It's got some fresh thyme, and then we also have some tangerine flowers. It's going to be more of like the garnish. So they're actually edible, and they're phenomenal. I was obsessed with them after I tried them, so I decided we have to do it. Got to put it in a cocktail.
Great. Should we shake one up?
I think so. Yeah. So we're going to start with a little bit of simple syrup, just half sugar, half hot water, let it kind of boil down. And then we're going to do some half ounce of some fresh lime juice. Yeah. And then we're doing an ounce of our tangerine. And then we'll bring in the phenomenal Califino tequila. About an ounce and a half of that for us here. And then before shaking, we'll take our time and crush it in there. That's right.
The sound of shaking. That's just musical.
Right. The best sound in the world. We're going to double strain to keep all that extra stuff out of there. Finish off the garnish with a little thyme here. And a few of these beautiful tangerine flowers in a little bouquet style here. And then there you go.
Very good. There it is. And I have mine. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, 619 Spirits. And back to you, David.
Sure.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Darren. I want to ask if you make your scorpion vodka with scorpions.
Yes, it's actually scorpion peppers, not the poison.
I mean, I was like, because you were talking about all the other natural things that you put in your vodka, the pickled vodka.
Yeah.
Wow, scorpion vodka. That's going to have some kick, right? But okay, scorpion peppers.
Crazy, yeah.
So, thank you very much. So for everybody we just want to remind you, the reason why we do this is we want to tell everyone that there are other businesses in this community that need your support. So if you're looking for an opportunity to step outside of your home and have a cocktail, please consider visiting one of the businesses we share on Aperitivo. So thank you for joining us, Justin. We appreciate it. and sharing your.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Good.
All right, so reminding everyone of sort of protocol here. If you have a question, I do want this to be plenty interactive, because I imagine a lot of you have things that you want to tell Keturah about how much you enjoyed the Bohème. So don't be afraid to put something in the chat function or raise your hand if that's a challenge to you. You can always raise your hand, and Darren or I will try to look around the room and just make sure if you have a question. So our wonderful guest is Keturah Stickann, who you all know from her wonderful work in Bohème. And I think, you know, Keturah has done, while she was here, she did several donor calls with us. So many of you might have sat in and watched a program with Nick, or with, I think Bruce did one, you know, those sort of things. But we haven't done anything post-performance, right? So I wanted you all to have a chance to talk about it now that you've known what we just saw and what we just experienced. And also, you know, what we typically do is, if you attend opening night, you attend an opening night celebration, and everybody gets to run up to the director and talk to the director and say how much you loved their work. Well, we didn't have this opportunity this time. So this is your chance to be able to tell Keturah how much you love her work. Keturah, thank you so much for joining us. You are back home in Knoxville, right? Is that what you said? Sorry, yeah.
Yep.
So Keturah drove to San Diego to direct for us, and she drove home. So she got back to Knoxville safely and sound, clearly. So it's so great to have you here, and it was so great having you back in San Diego. And what I want to do here is just take some time and let everybody get to know you a little bit better, just as a person. So I always like to start off asking people about their childhood, really. So where did you grow up?
I grew up largely in Columbia, Missouri.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was born in Charleston, Illinois. I lived in Memphis, Tennessee for a little while as a kid, Springfield, Missouri, and then by the time I hit junior high school and high school, I was in Columbia. So Columbia feels like home.
I had no idea. I'm from Kansas City. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, no kidding. Are you Missourian? Missouri side or Kansas side?
Of course.
Missouri. Yeah, there are so many of us that in the opera business, it's always so interesting to meet other Missourians. Yeah.
So what role did, I know you were a dancer, and we'll get to that in a minute, but what role did the arts play in your life in Columbia, Missouri, when you were growing up?
I was, the arts was everything. My mother's a costume designer. So my dad, he's a writer, but he dabbled in acting. And so I was in community theater my entire childhood. I started dance when I was 5 and was heavy into dance, did community theater, and then also did theater in high school, show choir, and all the good stuff. And so the arts was everything to me as a kid. It was my entire social life. It was my family. It was everything that I did was surrounded with it.
Wow. Were your parents involved in the university at all?
No, my dad worked for the state. My mom was a freelance costume designer, and I have 3 brothers, so she had her hands full with that too. And so she worked at the community theater, plus she worked at Stevens College. She did some stuff for Stevens College. And then also some stuff for some regional theaters, Arrow Rock, Lyceum, that type of stuff.
Very cool. Nice. See, I learned something too, everyone. It's nice to do this because I learned as well. So so the direction that you took was eventually was dance, and that you just sort of knew that was going to be your path. So how did that happen? Where did you study? Did you go to college to study dance? What was the path?
Yeah, I did. I went to college part-time my junior and senior year of high school, taking dance classes at Stevens College, and then wanted to leave Columbia badly when I graduated from high school, as I think a lot of kids do when they get to that age. And so my parents wouldn't let me move to New York. So I moved to Chicago because that's somehow so much better. So I had family there. My grandmother was up there, and 2 aunts and a bunch of cousins. So I went to Columbia College, Chicago, got my degree. I had a double major in both dance education and performance choreography. So that's that. I went to school for dance, and then danced after college and started dancing in opera about 2 years after I was out of college. So that was my first foray into the opera world too, was as a dancer. And it's the first time I worked at San Diego Opera actually was as a dancer. So
did you work at Lyric or did you work at Chicago Opera Theater?
No, I was at Chicago Opera Theater. And then I also did some work at Michigan Opera Theater. And then later, once I started working in San Diego, then toured around to a couple of other places as well. But COT was my very first place that I worked as a dancer in opera.
Very cool. So for those of you that don't know, Chicago Opera Theater is the second company in Chicago, but is a very distinguished company of doing interesting, sometimes unusual repertoire, but unusual takes on repertoire. It has a long history. Very, very interesting company.
Well, I will tell you that the 3 shows I did at Chicago Opera Theater were Akhenaten, The Good Soldier Schweik, and I did Orfeo and Acis and Galatea, and then I also did A Death in Venice there. So yeah, it's.
Wow. So did you do Orfeo at Chicago Opera Theater that I think then went to BAM? Was it Diane Paulus? No.
It was Diane Paulus. Yeah.
So I saw that production at BAM a few years afterwards.
Okay, very cool.
Okay, I gotta ask some questions for the audience, not just myself. So how did you find your way from Chicago to San Diego?
Well, I was dancing. I had a dance company. Me and a friend of mine, Scott Putman, had a dance company called Cerulean Dance Theater. And I was, I think when you're really young and stupid, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So I just, we did the whole 501c3 thing. We did the whole 9 yards, and we had a company, and it lasted for 2 years, but we were both in our very early 20s and a little over ambitious. And so once it went away, I was doing a lot of pickup work, but Chicago just wasn't really, I just wasn't finding what I was looking for. So Malashok Dance, one of my dance teachers, Jan Urquhart, knew John really, really well and suggested that I go down and audition for him. So I went down, this was in 2001, and I went down and I auditioned for John, and he said, when can you start? And so I packed all my stuff up and moved to San Diego.
Wow.
So that's what got me to San Diego.
And you danced with Malashok for, how many of you, by the way, that's listening, how many of you know John Malashok and his work? He's been a choreographer for San Diego Opera quite a bit, but he has a distinguished company, a modern dance company that does wonderful work here in San Diego.
Yeah, that company changed my life in a number of ways. But I mean, some of the best work I did in my entire dance career was with John, and I was his assistant director actually for four years.
Wow.
5 years. 5 years.
Wow.
2001 to 2006.
Wow. So that brought you here, and then through Malashok, probably. So I'll try to give the order here, and Joan can help correct me. That got you associated with San Diego Opera, and you probably have more varied experience with San Diego Opera than anyone we've ever hired. So you've been a dancer. Joan said she thought you were sort of a super dancer at first, like a super.
Yeah, I was in Turandot, Lotfi Mansouri's production of Turandot on the Hackney set. Yeah. And that was in the same season, I think, as Pearl Fishers. And so I was a temptress in that. But yeah, it was a super role, but Lotfi wanted dancers, so hired 4 of us that worked for Malashok, and we came in and did that. So that was my very first job with San Diego.
And that was in 2004. Yeah. And that same season, you danced in Pearl Fishers, right? Which was everybody knows Zondra's Pearl Fishers, right? We've seen it here several times. So you danced in that. Was that the first production of that?
Yeah.
Production, the first time around.
Yeah, and then we toured with it quite a bit. I took it to, before I stopped dancing, we took it to New York City Opera, we took it to Michigan Opera Theater, and Colorado, I think it was Colorado.
Yeah, I think so.
Right, sort of dropped away.
For those of you watching, you may know that John choreographed that, right? So John's work was in that, and Keturah was one of his dancers. And we just happened to have a picture of you from that production. So Joey. So guess which one she is? She's second from the left, front row. That's Keturah waving those banners around. So that was your second experience, but your first sort of featured experience, I guess, with San Diego Opera. But pretty quickly, Joey, that's enough. You can let that go. Thank you. I just wanted to. It's a good memory.
It is. It is. That was a fun show.
So after that, you became a choreographer for us. You were also an assistant director and a resident assistant director, which we'll explain what that means in a minute, and then a director. And I think you haven't sung with us yet.
I haven't. No, I was associate director for Moby Dick, or was I already called the movement director by that time? My title for Moby Dick changed a lot, but I think I was still assistant or associate when I was in San Diego.
So Joan and Keturah, you can help me. How many? If you can just try to list all of the productions that you've been involved with San Diego Opera.
Okay, let's see. All right. Yeah, so we got Pearl Fishers and Turandot, and then it was seasons 2008 and 2009 that I assisted. So that would have been the year of Tannhäuser, Maria Stuarda, Tosca, Peter Grimes. It was 10 productions that I assisted.
Right.
So that's a lot. But after those 2 seasons, which Joan, I'm sure you can say what the list of those 2 seasons were. After those 2 seasons,
I'm looking it up.
I also choreographed Romeo and Juliet, choreographed and associate directed Moby Dick, choreographed and associate directed Cruz a la Cara de la Luna, and then directed Don Quixote and Turandot, and then now.
Was there not a Traviata in there too?
I never did a Traviata in San Diego.
So unlike everyone else that we usually talk with in this series, you have done a ton with us. I mean, she has been a staple of San Diego Opera in a variety of roles. And what I'm interested in learning is, so you were in the world of movement, you were a performer and you were a choreographer. How did you make the decision, and what led you to, and how did you do it to become a director? Assistant director first, I guess, and then director.
Well, see, dancers have a shelf life. And dancers know that when they walk into their career, they know they have a shelf life. They know, I mean, Gwyn Verdon said, dancers die twice, you know, once when their career ends, and once when they can no longer dance, and once when they actually pass away. And it's very, very true that career ender is huge, and it happens very young for most of us. I was 30 when I stopped dancing, which is a little younger than most. I had a back issue that kept me from keeping going on, but I've always had a narrative brain. I knew I got my degree in education. So at that point, I knew I didn't really want to be a teacher. I had figured that out in college. But I had always been interested in musical theater and loved the theatrical side of things. I loved the storytelling. Choreography is something that I'm capable of and I can enjoy in certain situations, but I always was much more interested in the narrative side of things. So when I was looking at what I was going to do after my career as a dancer was ending, I had gotten involved in opera and I had fallen in love with it because I thought it was such a great mix of my love for theater, my love for dance and music, and they mix really well together. And so I got in touch with Garnet Bruce and just said, I'm interested in learning how to be an opera director. I want to direct opera exclusively and specifically. And you know, can you help me? Can you help me figure out, you know, how to do this? And he said, well, the best thing that you can do is be an assistant director for a while and just work with people that you really want to learn from. And so he got me, he basically gave me name and email addresses for a bunch of different general directors. And I just sent out cold emails and said, I'm really interested in doing this. And Garnet Bruce gave me your name, and Florida Grand Opera got back to me and said, you know, we're looking for a staff assistant director. This was in 2005. We're looking for a staff assistant director for the 05-06 season. And would you be interested? And I said, yes. And drove to Florida and lived there for 5 months and did a few pieces down there, and the rest is history. I just, you know, once I started working in opera, I never worked anywhere else. I mean, the jobs just kept coming, which I feel very, very fortunate about. But it just was one of those things that I think when you find the thing that you are meant to do, it just, you know, it's just there. And I assisted until, well, I started the crossover into actually directing my own work in 2009. And then went to exclusively, Leonard Follia was the only person I was assisting by the time we hit 2011.
And Lenny directed the mariachi operas that we know, right?
Yeah, and Moby Dick.
Moby Dick, right. So you worked in San Diego as his assistant.
As his assistant and choreographer, yeah.
So I think everyone needs to understand exactly what an assistant director is, because it sort of sounds like maybe you're getting coffee for the director, which is not what it is. So maybe you can have a sip of your cocktail and then tell us, like, because I think an assistant director is a fascinating job. If you've ever been in the rehearsal room to watch what that person has to do, because it's a lot. So why don't you explain what the role of an assistant director is?
Yeah, and it truly depends on the director that you're working for. You know, I've worked with directors where I actually do get them coffee and take notes for them, and that's kind of where the job sits. That's not the position that I particularly like to be in. The jobs where I really felt like I shined as an assistant was when I was given a little more autonomy as an assistant. Leonard and I had, in the best of worlds, an assistant is truly a second pair of eyes and a true liaison between the director and everybody else. And when the director can't be at a production meeting because he's got to talk to the conductor about something, you're there to facilitate notes and to deal with the design team. Lenny and I feel very akin to the way he directs. We're very similar in a lot of ways. And so he and I, at a certain point, especially with pieces like Moby Dick, where we did it 10 times all over the world, that, you know, during runs, I would go to one side, he would go to the other, we would take notes, and then we would confer with each other during intermission. So an assistant, you know, if you put your neck out, if you stick your neck out and you're good at what you do, and the director trusts you, then an assistant really is someone who is there to lift up everything that you need to do, because the director's job is endless. And if you don't have an assistant, which I direct without an assistant in smaller companies quite a bit, and you just, as a director, you know that there's just a lot of stuff that's going to slip through the cracks, and you kind of have to be okay with that, because you cannot do everything that's asked of you as a director. When you have an assistant that you trust, you can delegate, and that assistant helps you get through all the stuff that you have to sort of wade your way through as you get yourself ready to be on stage. Yeah, and the greatest thing that I do as an assistant really is corral a chorus, and that makes it sound kind of awful. That's not what I mean by it. It's just
they're not wildlife. So
they're not. When you have a giant chorus show and the chorus is on stage over and over and over again, and there's 47 entrances for 87 people, and you've got an assistant director is invaluable, because that's the assistant director is there to take care of the chorus's needs, to make sure they're all where they need to be, to make sure that the assistant directors are totally on board with all of the entrances and exits so that they can do their job. There is almost no way to effectively direct a giant chorus show without an assistant who can back you up with all of the stuff.
Absolutely. So that's a big role typically, is dealing with the chorus and managing all of that, so the director can focus on the bigger picture. And now you were assistant director on Don Quixote first, is that right?
I was, that's correct, yep.
And then you came back and directed the remount of Don Quixote, same production, which is also something that assistant directors often do. Oftentimes when you bring back a remount of a new production, the director's gone on to something else, and the assistant director winds up taking the remount, or if it goes to another city, the assistant director takes that, which meant that you were directing the Don Quixote, which suddenly became what was meant to be the last opera of San Diego Opera. So you were here for all of that, right?
Yes, I was. Yes. It's, you know, it felt, I mean, because this company felt like home, it feels like home still. I was very, as stressful as that entire experience was, I was very, very happy to be doing the show there while that was happening, because I felt like I needed to be there.
That's really nice to hear, because instead of being afar somewhere and like feeling that story hitting you about a place that you felt like home, you were here kind of in it.
Yeah, so I actually changed my ticket so that I could be there for the entire run. So I stayed for all 4 shows.
So that's another thing that we just need to make sure everyone on the call understands. A director typically goes home when, Keturah? They go
day after opening.
Yeah. So they don't stay for the rest of the run of the performances. And it's a tradition. It's sort of what we do in the opera company. The assistant director does. And the assistant director's responsibility is to make sure that the show that opened on opening night remains the show that is on closing, right?
Yes.
So, as you guys can imagine, that's, you know, you have people that are creative, that are performers, and sometimes it's a tendency to wander from La Boheme into Turandot. I mean, you know, it can become something else if you don't have someone marshaling all of those forces. So,
and then you know, and I'm so sorry, David, but just an assistant also, you know, just because the director leaves doesn't mean that they don't have their fingers in the show at all. I mean, my assistants always send me a note after each show. Some of the, you know, different assistants have different styles, and some of them send me a big report about how the show is going, and some of them just say, hey, this was great and we had a little issue here and whatever. But I've never, I was an assistant for quite a while, and I've never worked with a director who didn't want to know what was going on during the run. It's very, very seldom that a director leaves and is like, bye. You know, like,
so those on the call may know, you may have had the chance to meet Alan Hicks, who is our our title before was associate director, I can't remember, but he is our resident assistant director now. So he really fulfills the role that Keturah fulfilled, which is assisting on all of the big shows. He also is a staff member at SDSU. So he runs the opera program at SDSU, which is kind of an interesting combination of having to balance those 2 schedules. But Alan's done a great job for us. I want to talk a little bit about, I want to go into Boheme, but before we do that, I want to talk about some of the other work that you've done. And from your website, I just got, instead of video, I just thought, let's look at some pictures, because you've directed some very interesting things. So Joey, why don't we run through some pictures here? So this is Peleas and Milizon.
Yeah.
And where was this?
This was at West Edge Opera in the Bay Area. We were in Richmond, California, in a huge warehouse. We built just sort of like what we did, except this was indoors, sort of like what we just did. This was a huge truss system that was built inside of an old warehouse. So we built the stage in there.
Very cool. So any of you it's a West Coast company, it's San Francisco, West Edge Opera. If you want to see some interesting kind of adventurous work, they're a really cool company. So get to know them. This was clearly a good experience for you because it's on your website.
Yeah, we had a great time. It was a fantastic cast. I just really, really lucked out with that cast.
Joey, next picture. This is a different look, but this is in Vermont, is that right?
Vermont, yeah. This is Ricky Ian Gordon's Orpheus and Eurydice. It's a song cycle, essentially, that's sung by Eurydice post-death. And Orpheus is played by, as you can see, a clarinet player who's there in the foreground. And then I had 4 dancers as well. We did this in the marble carving studio in Vermont that carved the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So cool.
And where in Vermont was this?
It's in Rutland, or just outside. I can't remember the name of the town, but it was just outside of Rutland, Vermont. And really, really tiny space, but like tiny town, but just really brilliant experience. Robert Wood conducted this, who's from Urban Arias, and had great dancers from, I had some Met dancers and some Boston Lyric dancers. And then that was Suzanne Kantorska who came in and sang for us.
So I got to ask a couple of things. How did you find this space, and why did you choose this space?
We knew we wanted to do it in a site-specific fashion, and that my set designer Liliana Duque Pinheiro, she's a sculptor, and so we wanted to do it almost like an installation piece of her sculpture, and then put the piece in and around it. We went to several outdoor locations, but Vermont's weather is always a little volatile, and so when we walked into this marble carving studio, it might not seem like it from the picture, but the history in there is really palpable. And so it just felt like the right space. And then Liliana she went around to old barns and old farms and collected, this is all reclaimed wood from old farmhouses in the area, and created this huge spiral that you could walk all the way up to where I'm pointing at it like you can see where I'm pointing, but all the way up to the yellow fabric that's hanging. They could climb all the way up there. So it made this sort of incredible loop all the way through the space. And then the audience sat all the way around it, which was interesting.
They could climb up onto that incline.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that I got a comment about this. Rutland is very near Pulteney, Vermont, which is where Mark Skorka of Opera America has his home.
Yes, that's right.
Summer home. Because I've spent the past almost every Thanksgiving in Pulteney, so I know Rutland very well. With Mark, I'm not able to go this year, travel limitations. And then the other thing is that I noticed that the hat on the clarinet player looks like Ricky's hat. Ricky's always wearing a hat like that.
We dressed him exactly like Ricky. Yeah. In fact, Ricky was supposed to come and then ended up having an emergency surgery. He's fine. But so he wasn't able to come. He was so planning on wearing this outfit to opening so that they could stand next to each other. But I have this wonderful photo that we used in promos of Ricky in his blue hat and his gray shirt, and Wesley Christensen, who is the clarinet player, in the same outfit. And it was an homage to him because the piece is about him. It's about him. He wrote it when his partner was dying. Yeah. And so the piece very much is about his own grief.
That's awesome. Next picture, Joey. This was from a double bill, and this is Seven Deadly Sins. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And so the double bill is Seven Deadly Sins and Pagliacci together, right? Yeah. And where did this happen?
This is at Virginia Opera in 2016. You can actually see we rented the New Orleans Opera set for Pagliacci. We did a very traditional, very straightforward Pagliacci. And then for Seven Deadly Sins, you can see where it says N.O. Opera Cav Pag on the set. We turned the whole set around so that I don't know who's familiar with Seven Deadly Sins, but there's a quartet of family members that stay home in Louisiana, and they lived in they stayed in the house, which was, of course, just the front of the house when it was turned around to be Pagliacci. And then, of course, the back is gray on those buildings, so it took video very, very well. And so we were able to just do a whole bunch of really interesting stuff with video there. A wonderful dancer. You can see her in the foreground in the fancier dress. That's Gabrielle Zucker. Gabrielle has been in a number of San Diego Opera productions as a dancer as well. So she lives in San Francisco.
I think the next photo is Pagliacci. So I put those, So you can see over, on stage left, house right there, that element that was probably turned around in the Seven Deadly Sins, right? Or maybe it's just reconfigured. But it's
on the left.
House right, stage left. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that it was turned around so that you could get into the back side of it. Yeah. So we just flipped it around and put the escape stairs behind it.
Super cool. Yeah. Very smart, very clever. Interesting combination if you know Seven Deadly Sins with Pagliacci. I think that's brilliant.
They worked really well together. And I'll tell you what, actually we put all of the main characters, all of the principal singers from Pagliacci were cameos in Seven Deadly Sins.
Oh, nice.
Because the whole notion of Seven Deadly Sins was that everybody in the real world, everybody in all the places that the Annas went to were in various clown costumes. And so all of the Pagliacci characters were in their clown costumes. And Anna, too, slowly turned into a clown. By the end, she was in full clown face. And so it was just this notion that we're all fools and capitalism makes us clowns, blah, 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 Brecht.
I love it. So let's look. I think maybe we have one more, Joey. Is there one more? Oh, there's two more. So I found this fascinating. So this is Monteverdi.
Yes.
Right? Which, if you guys know Monteverdi, I do. It's something I'm planning on doing. people think of it as being relatively intimate, but it tells a story that has a lot of scope, because if you know the story of Orpheus, he descends into the underworld to bring Eurydice back. You did this at Chautauqua.
I did, yes.
And you did a little Baroque opera in that huge outdoor venue.
Well, yes, we did, but I will tell you that this was the 1935 Respighi orchestration. So this tiny little Baroque opera, we called it Montespighi. This tiny little Baroque opera had a huge, grand orchestra. And so the sound was just, and it's funny, Daniel Belcher, who's singing Orpheus, who's there at the top of the ladder, he sung Orfeo so many times, and he, in the first time that he got in front of the orchestra during the Sitzprobe, he was just blown back by, he couldn't believe how big the sound was, because he was used to the little tiny Baroque orchestra. But so yes, it was the Monteverdi, but it was a little bit different.
So let's look at this, because you have Orpheus up there with his lyre. On Earth still, clearly, right? Before he's descended.
Well, this is the very, very end of the piece when the Bacchae come out. And so it has transformed back to Earth, and then the Bacchae come out, and it's slightly different usually than the way the Baroque version, the original version, went. The Bacchae come out, and he sings an aria, and then Apollo, his father, comes out and tells him that he is good, that he's worthy of rising. And so he strips all of his clothes off, and he climbs up the ladder, and two of Apollo's pages dress him in the night sky and hand him a lyre. And so these are actually the people on Earth who turned around and found Apollo, or Orpheus and Apollo, in the sky.
I found it very interesting because that looks like a cast from the other Ricky opera,
Grapes of Wrath.
Exactly, it looks like it's Grapes of Wrath.
It's set in 1935 in upstate New York. So.
Oh, very cool. I think we have one more picture because I wanted to show the scale of the venue. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There it is. This is the very beginning of the opera. Now that's the wedding between.
So they are on Earth at that point, of course.
They are on Earth. Yeah.
Not been bitten by the snake yet. Very interesting take on that piece. I was sort of fascinated by this.
Oh, thanks.
Do you have more? I think that might be it for the actual pictures. That's it. Good. So interesting. I wanted to show you some things that were different that Keturah has done that clearly she's proud of because they're on her website. Now we need to talk about Bohème. So you were hired to direct Bohème here before COVID. So you were meant to be our director of a Bohème that was supposed to be at the Civic, and we have a new set, which most people don't know about. What's happening in the opera world right now is we try to sell sets when they've had their useful life from us, and it just doesn't work. Joan can comment on that. It's just like there's just no appetite for it anymore. So typically what we do is a company will say, if you'll take it from us, so we don't have to pay to dispose of it, we'll give you the set. So Montreal gave us a new Bohème, which is beautiful. It's a gorgeous Bohème. I was very excited about it. And you were meant to direct that Bohème.
Yeah.
So COVID comes and we share with you, I don't know how we actually shared it with you and when, but that we were planning on going forward. But guess what? It's not going to be Bohème in a theater on the set that you imagine, but it's going to be something wholly different. How was that process mentally for you?
Well, I think by the time that we talked about what the restrictions were going to be and how different it was going to be, I had already been talking to so many directors who were already dealing with restrictions and some of these things in various other places. And so I wasn't shocked by the restrictions and by how you wanted to do it per se, but the reality of thinking about how to do a piece like Bohème when, nobody can get near each other and we're going to be outdoors and there's not really a set and there's, all of the things that sort of came all at once. yeah, I had to sit down for a second and really think about it before I could, I mean, I certainly never for a moment thought that I didn't want to do it. I was so excited I love challenges like this. So this was very exciting for me, but at the same time, you know, you like, well, they can't get within 15 feet of each other. And then you have to sit back and think, okay, I'm not sure how we're doing this. Yeah, you know, it took me sitting down and reading through the score and really thinking about what the possibilities were for telling this story in a fashion that still put the storytelling first and didn't turn it into a concert, which I think would have been really easy to do.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, it's very interesting. We'll circle back to some of the comments that you mentioned at the beginning about why you wanted to move into opera, because the narrative experience and exploring narrative world was important to you and it moved you. And so I know that when I told our staff first, before we talked much with you, I'm sure it was getting to you through the production team, that whatever we do here, I mean, we're going to be doing Bohème and we have to do Bohème. So we have to tell the story of Bohème within the restrictions that we've set up. And that was the most important thing for me, to still have the audience understand and really grasp the story that they all love, because everybody knows Bohème so well. And that was the challenge, of course, then I posed to you. And then you came back to me with this brilliant idea. We had a phone conversation and Keturah said, you know, I just want to chat with you about what I'm thinking about and run it by you first before I kind of go full into it. And the idea of memory like solves so many problems. So how did that come about? Was it digging into the score? Was it digging into the book that the play is based upon?
It was the book. You know, I had just, for the very first time, because, you know, I had never directed a Bohème. I had assisted on a number of them. So I was familiar with the opera, but I hadn't really taken a deep dive into it the way that you do when you're directing a piece. And so I had read the Merger book, and the book is a series of stories, and he casts himself in the book as the Rodolfo character, and they really are about his memories of playing. He was playing poor. He of his years of sowing his wild oats in Paris's in the left bank of Paris, and as I picked up the book when I was trying to think about how to make these changes, and the more that I read through these, the more I realized that he's writing them as memories, and he's writing them from, you know, 10, 15, well, it was actually 10 years after he had kind of moved into his own life. And so he was writing these from memories of this period. And it just, I don't know, sometimes things just dawn on you. And I just thought, well, if we just did that, you know, and that's when I really sat down with the score and started looking. I was like, okay, can that work with the text the way that it's set by Illica? Can it really actually fit that way? And it really, I felt largely could. There was very little that I felt like we were going to have to sort of futz around with to make it work. So that's where it came from.
We talked about this, but now when you're reflecting back and I'm reflecting back at the experience of seeing this, it's pretty clear that the book was sort of first person reflective from Rodolfo's point of view, which sets up the story of how we produced it. First person reflective,
yep. Present
time, in the past, of course, but in the evening of the opera, Rodolfo is in present time reflecting back on everybody else who is in, you know, past time. And that idea of that just opens up the magical possibilities of space, right? Like suddenly space is no longer your enemy. It's actually how you tell the story in an effective way.
Well, and what's missing doesn't matter because he's remembering what he remembers. And we remember, I mean, memories are weird things, right? We remember certain things, and there's certain things that are just huge holes in whole experiences. And, you know, Joshua Guerrero, who sang the role of Rodolfo, I mean, he actually told me, he said one of the most amazing things was actually that he, playing Rodolfo, actually got to play that evening in real time. Wow. That for him, it was 86 minutes of his life as Rodolfo. It wasn't, he didn't have to skip over any moments. It was him the whole time. And I found that I hadn't thought about that until he said that we gave him the opportunity to really have a full experience of dramatic transformation for himself.
So I will say that that's a very interesting point, because in the world of opera, audiences sometimes feel like the dramatic realty isn't always there, and because it's not, because directors and performers don't know how to deal with that artifice that happens in opera, where you've sung a scene and then you go back to your dressing room and hang out for 20 minutes and then you come back, and then like how to actually make that gel as a dramatic experience that makes sense. Andrea Carroll said the same thing. She said it's just like the most compelling Bohème because it just sort of rolls straight through, right? And you also, I thought an interesting thing, that a choice you made was that idea of giving Josh, the Rodolfo, stuff. He had a physical world, and everybody else didn't. I mean, they sat on a stool or whatever, but when she broke the plate, there was no plate. There were sound cues that sounded like she was breaking a plate, but nobody else had props. They were in the world of memory, which meant they didn't need those things, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's really great. So I'm going to let people talk in just a minute, but I want to talk through a couple of things. So spacing is probably what started your thinking about how do you tell the story, because that was, I mean, we were very clear about this, just so everybody remembers, we had to work with the unions that represent the interests of several kinds of employees, and singers are one of those, right? And we all know that aspirates, what singers give out, is really the centerpiece of danger for COVID right now. So that was our biggest kind of critical thing to get our minds around. How are we going to make it safe? Not for the audience, we knew they'd be far enough away, they'd be in cars, but for themselves and for each other and for the whole process. So the restrictions were 15 feet in front and 4 feet on either side. And they had to sort of stay in their own bubble. And if they turned significantly, there still had to be 15 feet between them and another person. So you had to really think about that spacing. So that was your first constraint that you had to deal with and figure out how to tell the story with it. And the memory was the solution to that. But that also meant that we couldn't have a chorus, because there was really no way to think about a chorus with that same spatial relationship. It just didn't work for us. So we had to cut the chorus. So we had to have approval from the union to do Bohème without the chorus, which we gained approval. But then you and Bruce had to figure out how the chorus is already also part of the storytelling. Yeah. So how do we cut the chorus effectively? So what is that process like between you and music staff?
Well, Act 3 was really easy because the chorus is on before the principals are on. So for that, it was no big deal. But Act 2, where the chorus is fully integrated with the scene that's happening with the principals, it came down to what do we cut that the principals are singing, and where do we just tacit what the chorus was singing and actually continue to sing the principal lines. And yeah, that it just Bruce and I talked constantly. He would make an initial cuts idea. We would get on Zoom. We would talk through it. He'd say, oh, this isn't lining up. This isn't lining up. But I know that you really want these 3 lines. So let me see if I can make this work. And we just went back and forth and negotiated with it until we came to something that felt like the story was still being told, and we weren't. It wasn't just inundated with all this emptiness where the chorus should have been. And the hardest part, of course, is the very end of Act 2, when the chorus is singing and that the march is happening, where the parade is going by, and then there's all of the really important information about how Musetta and Marcello finally get together and how they get rid of Alcindoro. What I did find in that, once we finally put it together, first of all, was there was a lot more space in there than I was ready for. But second of all, that for the very first time, I fully am like, this is my 4th Bohème. Yeah, 4th Bohème, and I finally fully understood what happened in that scene between the principals, because, you know, it's always just such a mess. There's always just kids and soldiers and everybody with signs and stuff. They're all selling stuff, and it always feels like such a mess. And I felt like for the very first time, we actually were just concentrating on this dysfunctional love relationship between Marcello and Musetta in that scene. And it felt really good to be able to dive into that in that way. And I'm not sure that Bruce and I found the perfect solution to all of the cuts, but I think we got pretty close to a very workable
I have to say that when I first heard it, I mean, you guys shared it with me and I understood it on paper. But then when I heard it in rehearsal first, and I realized there was a lot of music, not a ton, but there was some music for Parpignol and chorus that was still there without them singing, I was a little nervous. But ultimately it was like memory again. So that's like, there's the memory of Parpignol without him actually being there, and memory of cues from the chorus. So it actually worked really well in that memory scape.
Well, what Bruce and I talked about was just that, like, you know, when you're falling in love with somebody and you go out with them, you might remember the argument and the crazy that time that crazy woman came back and mocked your best friend. You'll remember that. And you'll remember that there were crowd noises, but you're not going to remember the crowd. You don't remember anything about because all you were thinking about was that girl that you were falling in love with that was next to you. Right. So, you know, talking to Josh, we were like, yeah, you know, you remembered that it was noisy, but you really don't remember anything else.
Yeah, you don't remember the song they were singing. You just know it was noisy behind you. That's great. So let's talk about the rehearsal process. How it was different than normal. Clearly it was outdoors. I don't know if everyone realizes this, but every moment of everything we did was outdoors, except for when the artists were dressing in the performances. Yep. So, you know, it's a different world to rehearse outdoors, right?
In a Santa Ana, by the way.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think that our hottest day, it was 105 degrees.
Yeah. Outdoors. Yeah. In La Mesa. So, you know, there you go. But typically, not only the being outdoors and listening and them singers being able to hear each other, but the way that you communicate with the artists and the way that you communicate with your assistant and the staff and all of the things that happen in a normal rehearsal were different because you can't just whisper in somebody's ear because that's a COVID issue, right?
Yes.
So talk a little bit about what that experience was like.
Well, I didn't fortunately, all of our singers are consummate professionals and had all done their roles before. So it didn't feel like I had 4,000 notes to give to Alan that I couldn't give to him.
Yeah.
But I didn't give me as many notes. I gave a few, but I just had to get used to the fact that I was just going to have to talk out loud.
Yeah.
And, you know, that I couldn't lean over and whisper in his ear. I just had to say it. And if the singers got distracted, I would try to do it as little as possible. But yeah, it's, I think the biggest difference, because I have to say, like, once you get into rehearsals, it didn't matter how hot it was. It didn't matter that we were on asphalt. It didn't matter. It felt like home. We were at rehearsal. It felt beautiful. It was great. But, you know, we had backing up trucks. We had kids on skateboards that came and actually watched quite a bit of rehearsal, but also, you know, made a lot of noise and skated around. We had the day that they decided to deliver all of the, I don't know what they were delivering, pallets and pallets and pallets of stuff. That made noise every time they lowered the thing to get it off the truck. We had people on the balcony that would whoop and holler and clap every time we finished an aria. So it was getting used to the distractions of being in a public space during a rehearsal process. That really was the hardest transition.
Very cool. If those of you that weren't able to experience that, it was really kind of magic when you'd go over and watch rehearsal, because we did rehearsals at the Kroc Center in Rolando, La Mesa. And we were in a parking lot kind of on the back of the building, which had big parts of it that were covered parking because of solar panels, right? And then in between, we put up a tent. So we had a big space. But behind it is an apartment complex that's 2 stories with balconies on the front. And families would come out and sit on the balconies and just watch. So I actually found that to be really kind of touching, that they were like, what is going on in our neighborhood, right? All right, so we only have a few minutes left because I do like to try to keep this to an hour. We have 5 minutes left. Let's look and see if anybody has any questions. And also, if you guys just want to tell Keturah how much you loved what she did. I mean, I would love to hear some of your responses. Sylvia, you were sharing a little earlier before we started, just how much you felt about this production. Anyway, Joan has her finger up, so she's going to say something.
I just want to, you know, Keturah talked about all the staging and all that, you know, and all of that, and that's a big part of it. But I also want to point out that she basically directed 2 shows. She directed what was on the stage and also what you see on the screen, because most of the audience saw the bulk of the show on the screen. So I don't know if that's necessarily a new skill for you, Keturah, or not, but you really had to focus what was going on there.
I learned how to do a shot list.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, no, seriously, if you guys, and I would try to make sure if anybody came 2 nights that they had a different experience. And if they were not close to a screen, and the second night they were close to a screen, because it was so good. I mean, it was so strong visually between the camera shots that you'd lined up. It was so well directed that it was as interesting and different from what you saw on stage that it was worth seeing. So kudos to you for that. Keturah, thank you so much. So glad you got back to Kentucky safely, and I'm really looking forward to the next time you're going to be here, which will not be too long. So
thank you so much. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Hope you had a good time. Bye-bye.